Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and we are thrilled that you have found us here at Crime Time at A Mighty Blaze on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. And welcome, welcome, welcome to this edition of A Mighty Blaze Crime Time. I am your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense. My current book is Her Perfect Life, which you see on the door behind me. And coming up soon is going to be my new book, The House Guest, which is sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise. So I cannot wait to talk to you about that. I hope that sounds good. Today here on Crime Time, I have the absolute joy and honor of interviewing. Well, let me show you her book. Of interviewing Ann Dávila Cardinal, whose book is so gorgeous and so immersive. We were talking before the show. It is giving me dreams. I am dreaming about things because of feeling so connected with this novel. And I'm really not quite sure when the last time was that kind of thing happened. So that shows you about the writing, and we can talk about that. Again, the name of it is The Storyteller's Death, which is sort of magical reality. I'll let Anne explain it to you. Let me tell you, though, Publishers Weekly said in the starred review, Cardinal's storytelling prowess shines in this beautifully imagined and multi-layered story, as do her fully developed characters. Fans of sweeping family sagas will enjoy every page. And that's sort of not the half of it. You know, it's elegant. The structure is gorgeous. It's unique. It's imaginative. It's somehow seamless. And I want to talk to Anne about how she did that, because that is a hard task. Finally, Anne, welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy Pub Day to you. I know it's not your first pub day ever, but this is a big deal.
This is the biggest, quite honestly, because this book was 17 years in the making. So I'm very excited. Thank you. And I'm so honored to be here. And I love seeing the comments. Where is everybody's zooming from?
No, exactly. When I look over here, you all, I'm looking at the comments. I'm reading your comments, and I see Diane Dick from Oregon and Pamela Fry Priest and Anissa Joy Armstrong is here. Thank you so much. And here's Joanne Broberg from Being Here, who says, love the title, The Storyteller's Death. Indeed. And we'll talk about that, as well as 17 years in the making. This is a good moment for me to say to you, if you are new to A Mighty Blaze, welcome to you all. We are so pleased you have found us. A Mighty Blaze was founded 2.5 years ago, crazily enough, at the beginning of the pandemic, by the marvelous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us talking, keep us discussing books, keep us finding new authors, and just sort of keeping together this community. And look, indeed, Jenna is waving from Boston today, and we are honored to have you here, darling Jenna, the queen of us all. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And wonderful that you are here to hear from Ann Dávila Cardinal about her fabulous The Storyteller's Death. Now, if you don't know Ann, let me read you a little bit of her bio, and then I promise I'll let her talk. This always drives me crazy because I think, stop talking, and then I think I have to tell you about our guest. So you all know to put up with this. Let me tell you a little bit about author for today. Ann is a novelist and director of recruitment for Vermont College of Fine Arts, where she also earned her MFA in writing. She comes from a long line of Puerto Rican writers, and we can talk to her about that. Look at the hearts from Susie Baldwin. That's nice. Ann's first novel, Sister Chicas, which she co-wrote, was released from New American Library in 2006. So keep this timeline in your head. Her next novel, a horror YA work entitled 5 Midnights, came out from Torteen in 2019. It won the 2020 International Latino Book Award for Best Young Adult Fantasy and Adventure, and was a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award. That is a huge deal. You all know that. Category 5, also Torteen, released in 2020. It's a 2021 International Latino Book Category nominee as well. Her next young adult horror novel, called Breakup from Hell, that is the perfect title for a teen horror novel, will be released by HarperCollins in January of 2023. Her short stories have appeared in numerous anthologies. Her first adult novel, the Puerto Rican magical realist mystery, The Storyteller's Death, was released from Source Books today. Look at this again. I'll talk to you about the cover in a minute. And we are giving away, Source Books and Ann are giving away a copy of The Storyteller's Death to one lucky commenter today. So say hi, leave a comment, applause, whatever you like, and you will be entered to win a copy, and we'll spin for your name on the Wheel of Fun at the end of the show. Finally, Ann lives in Vermont with, she says, her husband in a lovely little house with a massively creepy basement. So that sounds like a book in itself. And welcome. I want to talk to you about family and love and storytelling and culture and responsibility and truth and reality and fantasy. But let me ask you, I love to hear authors describe their own books. Tell us a little bit about this book.
Sure. I mean, it's very much, it's the closest thing I'm going to come to a memoir. So it's about a girl who's Isla Sanchez Larson, who is half Puerto Rican. Her father dies when she's 8, and her mother's drinking worsens, and she gets sent down to Puerto Rico to be with her mother's family every summer, like a forgotten piece of luggage. And so she's, it helps her deal with her alcoholic mother at home, but it also is, she feels abandoned. And so she sort of grows up with this duality and with trying to deal with the situation at home and grieving for her father. But when she's 18, she develops a gift or a curse, depending on how you look at it, where she starts seeing, when a storyteller in the family dies, she sees their stories as visions, and they don't go away until she writes them down. They'll just keep running until her great aunt dies and she sees a murder, and and it doesn't go away when she writes it down. So she realizes it's a mystery that she has to solve in order for it to go away before it kills her too. And it takes place mainly down in Puerto Rico and in the summers of late 1970s. And so it's very much based on family stories from my own family. And I loved telling Isla's story.
Well, I mean, everything you said is fascinating. And I want to start at the beginning of it, because you said when a storyteller dies, and just that word, tell why that it's not just when anyone dies, when a storyteller and her family dies. Talk a little bit about that lineage and legacy and what that means.
Sure. The book started with that first line, which is, I was with a group of writer friends many years ago, and I said, we're talking about how elderly people are treated in different cultures. And I said, there was always some old woman dying in the back room of my childhood. And a friend of mine said, that's it. That's the beginning of a short story. And so I started exploring the stories from my family. And at that point, the older generation was really aging in Puerto Rico. And I was thinking about all the stories that are dying with them. And I regretted not getting more of them. And I realized that with them go pieces of history. And so I really wanted to capture those stories, particularly for my son, who had never met my mother. She had passed before he was born. And so I like the idea of capturing family stories and then taking them sort of to the next level.
But taking this again in a little bit of steps, when someone tells a story, they're telling their version of the story.
Exactly.
And one of the things that your main character has to deal with is thinking about, is this the story they want us to hear? This is the story they want us to hear. What have they left out? What are they not saying? What is truth? What is their truth? And sort of, as you're saying, what happens when the story that is told by someone becomes the reality and everything else goes away? Let's talk a little bit about that, about truth and reality and storytelling, and how you as an author kind of we're doing the same thing. We're telling our story. So there's a massive question for you. Let's talk a little bit about what is real of stories and what the power of them is.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, because the stories that are told in this book were based on actual Dávila family stories, right? And so I remember telling, my mother had passed, and I remember telling one of her brothers that I had learned that our great-grandfather had shot himself in a room in the house. And he said, that's not true. That's not true. He died in the hospital. And I was devastated. I was like, wait a minute. So what I know of our family, does that mean it's not true? And a cousin said to me, Annie, why does that bother you? Don't the stories that aren't true say as much about your families as the ones that are? And that was incredibly powerful to me. But then years later, another uncle said, oh, he absolutely shot himself. They didn't tell Jorgito because he was too young. And so all of a sudden I'm like, it's like whiplash. And it's sort of like, I started thinking about, does it matter if it's true or not? Because it really is part of who they are, right? And we are storytellers. And so I love the idea of taking it and then making it your own. But my brothers will tell you, we'll have one incident from our childhood and I'll tell one story and they'll say, that is not how it happened. And everybody has their own version. And it's sort of like there's value in all of it to me. You know?
Yes, I see the value in all of it. And I think from the standpoint of me being a reporter, I'm interested in the truth. I mean, I want that. And then I'm also, as an author, as a fiction author, I'm interested in the story. I can tell you that, so silly, but when I was in college, I came home one Thanksgiving and I had created a game called I think it was called Familial Pursuits, after Trivial Pursuits, obviously. And it was questions about our family. And we sat around the dining room table and everybody in the family picked a card. And it would be like, who was home the night the barn burned down? And everyone in the family had a different answer that they completely believed. And it was, and another one was, my real name is Harriet Ann, and they called me Annie. So another question was, name 4 of Annie's college roommates. Name 4 of Annie's college roommates. And my stepfather could not name one of them. And I thought, oh, you have no idea about my life, do you? You know, it was really fascinating. So back to the book, but this is what this is about. This is about family stories and how we tell each other stories. And your main character, though, she is given, it's not just stories she hears. You have taken this, as they say, to another level, and you make her be in the story. Talk about that concept and how you made that work.
You know, and that's one of the reasons why I started with real ones, because I wanted it to feel real. And when I don't know whether this is true with everybody, Hank, but when I'm told stories, particularly family stories, I see them in my head. I'm a very visual person. It's like a movie in my head. And so, you know, I've heard all these stories and I had these images in my mind. And so I like the idea of taking that out of the body. And there are people who've read it who are like, well, she's clearly, you know, delusional. And these are her delusions. I'm like, well, you know, you could see it that way, I suppose. But I see it as these stories are reality for family members. And so I sort of like the idea of bringing them into the real world. And then for me, the healing is in the actual telling, and also, like you said, there's some of them that aren't true. There's one that she's like, that is absolutely not how it happened, but this is the story this woman is leaving behind. This is the one she wants to tell. So this is the one that's important to her. I don't know. You can really sort of get really deep into the psychological piece of it.
Because the story she wants to tell, that is so poignant and so powerful and so moving. But again, it's not really true if we care about the truth. Now, for you, all of you who are listening to this, if you have not read The Storyteller's Death, we're talking about The Storyteller's Death today by Ann Dávila Cardinal, and we are giving away well, I'm not, I'm keeping this one, but Ann and her publisher Source Books are giving away a copy to one lucky commenter, so don't forget to do that. When you read this book, you'll see, though, that the main character becomes part of the story. There's always this sort of one line of text where you think, oh, here she goes, when you start recognizing it. And then she is somewhere else. It's not that she's thinking about the story or being told the story. She is in the story, which is, you handled it so seamlessly and so brilliantly. Talk about writing that. How are you as a writer doing that?
I mean, I wanted to have it not just be something she sees in the air, like a movie, right? I wanted it to be something she would feel, and then increase this sort of the impact these stories have on her. So with each story, she learns something new, and it goes up a notch. And so, like, there's one of the hurricane, because I remember all my life I was told the story of the last Category 5 hurricane on the island before Maria was in 28, I think it was. And my mother lived through it, and the roof got blown off the house. And I always heard this story, and my grandfather had to come on horseback and rescue them. And so I decided to, you know, have that in the novel, but she gets hurt. And so not only does she inhabit it it can affect her physically, not just emotionally or mentally. And the stakes get higher and higher. And then when she sees the murder, she's in direct danger, of this unknown.
How did that idea evolve to you that her reality would get realer, her story travel would get more and more real?
I like that. I think because they became more and more real for me.
Mm.
After my mother died, I suddenly, when I was in New York City and my mother's alive, the fact that I was half Puerto Rican never really came into play. Diversity is all around you, whatever. Spanish, you hear reggaeton in the street, but I moved to Vermont and I was like, I'd lost that piece. And so it became really important for me to bring that into my reality. And so all those stories that I used to take for granted became incredibly important to me. And they affected me physically as well as emotionally. And I became, I started going to the island more often and being much more in touch with my family because I needed them. They were my way of holding on to my mother in some capacity. And so those stories held more weight. And I think that way, giving them the increased weight and the increased importance in her life is also the sort of the trajectory I went on.
Did you plan that as you were thinking about the book? No, talk about that.
No, I started this. The reason this book is 17 years is that first of all, I skipped a large portion of her life. And she went from 8 years old to 18. And it wasn't until this past 2 years when my editor at Source Books, Krista Desir, bought the book. And she said, Ann, and I know I had advisors in the MFA who told me this and I couldn't hear it. They're like, Ann, you really need to show her life with our alcoholic mother in New Jersey. I'm like, you're going to make me go there. You're going to make me go there. And so I had to tap some very difficult memories. And though it is fiction, the heart of it was my experience of growing up with an alcoholic parent. And I really, as a writer, want to tell those stories because I want kids who went through this or adults who went through this to see themselves and to see that somebody else has had this experience. And so I had to mine those feelings. And I got to tell you, the 4 chapters came out fully formed. They barely needed to be edited. And I think it's because I was gestating them for, so many years.
Also, they were sort of true stories. They were your real stories that you were telling. I mean, when her mother is drunk on the airplane and when people look at them funny and disparagingly, and all she wants to do is just be away from it. But she sees it. She sees things that her mother doesn't see. The one rum and then another one and then another one, and how her mother behaves. It's really heartbreaking and really touching. But you talk about cuentista. Talk about that word and your use of Spanish and the language throughout the book. Is there a lineage of cuentistas?
In my family, yes. They're very practical people. It's an interesting, this image of Hispanics as being very emotional people is not true in my family. They're actually very close to the vest. They circle the wagons, and I'm like all over the place. I think you guys have known me for 15 minutes. You probably know that. And so it was sort of interesting to watch. I'm like, wait a minute, they're very reserved, and how a lady behaves and all this. But they did tell stories, and that's when things sort of came alive. And I remember sitting at people's feet and listening to these stories about the island and about the history. And there's this one character in there called Chachu. And he's based on I have chills. This is based on a family friend who was like, for me, the epitome of Puerto Rican masculinity. He took care of you. He was warm. He walked in the room and everyone knew he was there. And like, this is sort of my way of honoring that. And so cuentista is the person who draws everyone together, even from people who are generations gone. But it wasn't I don't think it was honored in the family as it is to me. And that's why I felt this need to document. And there's some ladies rolling in their graves, absolutely rolling in their graves. I mean,
there are some people applauding you as well, though, saying finally.
Hank, I hope that they got more involved as they moved on. But I had to think about that, and because it's about racism, I had to face how you can love somebody so fiercely, but they have belief systems that go against everything you believe. And so I was sort of dealing with that too. So I faced some difficult truths. It wasn't just the stories about my family that were good. It was also the ones that were hard.
And the ones that the main character faces that are hard when you talk about love and conflict and beliefs and protection and those kinds of things. Let's talk a little bit about what this cover is and the scene where we first realized that.
Yeah, those are canepas. I actually have, I don't know if you can see it here. I got it tattooed on my arm because canepas are very important. If there's anybody who's from the Caribbean on here, that they're a fruit. They're actually a pit with fruit because there's a very large pit and the fruit is on the outside. And they're very emotionally loaded for people in the Caribbean. They see it and they go, oh, canepas. And so there's a sort of a very sensual scene between the Isla and her love interest. I gave her the boyfriend I always wish I had in my childhood, but where he holds it out for her. So it's sort of very symbolic, but also he was poor and he grew up that way and he ate those sometimes because that was all he had. And so that's a very significant, she realizes where her family is in terms of class.
And that scene is so incredibly memorable. As you say, it's so sensual, so Adam and Eve and someone offering a fruit.
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that.
Oh, that's how
I like that.
That's how this is the end of innocence for her a little bit. And her, she becomes who she is for better or for worse. And her relationship sort of change. I don't know. I made that up. It could be wrong. But, and when she says, I love this, I could eat this every day. And he says, well, not if you had to, in much better writing. But the realization that she comes to in that. You come from a family of writers. Did you always want to do this?
No, I didn't. I never even considered it was an option. I was the kind of reader growing up that I would read in the bathroom at school, because I didn't want to be in class. I wanted to read. And in fact, I always say that Charlotte's Web saved my life when I was 8, because when my father was dying of ALS, I read it over and over and over again. And what I didn't know is that Charlotte's Web is a manual for how to deal with death. Right. And so I said to a friend, I was clutching it to my chest the day they took my father's body from the house. And it's like, so reading was always very important to me, but I had such reverence for it. I wouldn't have even considered that I could write. And it didn't happen until I was in my 30s. And it was this inspiration of writing stories for my son, because I wanted him to know his Puerto Rican side. And I want him to know my mother, who was a complicated relationship, as you got from the book, since it is based on my relationship with my mother. But I love the woman fiercely. And so I wanted him to get that sort of sense. And so that's where it started from. So I'm not new, but I haven't been writing for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Charlotte's Web, going back to that, shows you also something that you mine so gorgeously in The Storyteller's Death. We're talking about The Storyteller's Death, you all. Just brand new today, launch day by Ann Dávila Cardinal from Source Books. That if you don't love someone passionately, then their death matters less to you. And the more you love someone, the more there is this loss to be mourned. Charlotte's Web, I can't even think about it without crying.
I know.
But I never thought about it as a manual for grief, but that makes it be so much sweeter.
Yeah,
actually. So when you were saying that you were in a writer's group and you said the first line about the old woman dying in the back, and you make that a motif throughout. Someone that Isla talks to and sort of works from the women that come through, cycle through, talks to and works out things with, the kinds of different women who do that. Your writing is so lyrical and so immersive. How are you as a person, as a writer, when you're sitting at your desk or wherever it is you sit and you transport yourself to this story? What's that like?
I write at this point, I write pretty sparingly at first, and I write a draft sort of to get the story down. And then I go and the thing about magical realism, I was raised on it. My mother loved it. I read those books from the time I was 10, and Marquez, Allende, all these incredible books. And what I loved was the lush language and the setting, and you could smell the night blooming jasmine. And I really wanted to make that happen. And I remember one night I was working on trying to describe the garden around my great aunt's house. and I was IMing on Facebook with my cousin Carlos in Puerto Rico, and he knows all about plants. And so we're discussing which tree, which one had the pods, all this stuff. And it really, I wasn't interested in that when I was a kid. And I'm sorry. I don't know which ones were which. And I'm sorry I didn't have Ann Dávila walk me around. And so it was really nice to be able to explore that. And I wanted readers to see the land and smell it and feel the heat, like, so they feel like they were there.
And that works so completely. But for you, I mean, this book is so much about relationships and so much about family and growth and evolution, and truth and reality. I mean, the magical part, I have so many questions for you, but do you channel the character? Did you channel her as you wrote her? Did your imagination start to flower?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I think she was, she's very much based on my story, but they take on their own personalities, as you well know. And she's sort of who, in some ways, she's who I wished I was. And in other ways, I was just sort of a different kid. And, but she took on her own personality and started saying her own things. And I like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a writer. That's being a writer. And she wouldn't exist without you being who you are now. If you were someone else, she wouldn't be here. So that's how to think about that.
And I guess you do channel them. I mean, you start to get, so you're seeing things through their eyes, and that's what's sort of, if it was just, otherwise it'd be memoir. I like that they go off on their tangents.
Yeah. I mean, can you tell anything about the monkey story? The monkey story was so amazing. Did that actually come from your family?
Yes. And my great aunt, Anna, who I was very close with, we had the same birth date. She's the one who sort of saved me from my mother's drunken sort of, but she used to tell me, she used to say, one day the monkeys got loose from the zoo. And it got to the point where we would laugh and the story wouldn't get finished. But it was very elaborate about her, coming and eating from the fruit. And my uncle says, wait a minute, the nearest zoo is across the island. And he's like, she's just making that up. And you know what? Again, it didn't matter. It was so much fun to hear her tell that story. And I could see it. When I was a kid, it meant so much. I could imagine the monkeys swinging from the trees over the house. And monkeys aren't indigenous to Puerto Rico. Oh. So, it was sort of funny to think about it now. But, excuse me, she enthralled me with the story. And so I really wanted, and the first story, I wanted it to be playful. I didn't want it to be...
well, that's it. You did that so perfectly, because you draw us into, this is entertaining, this is so funny, this is going to be fun, and then the story gets more darker and deeper and more meaningful, and so the light in the story just changes throughout, and you just juggle that so beautifully. We love source books, as we keep saying. What did your editor say when she read the final version, and what did your family say?
They're so supportive, and I don't have the kind of siblings who are like sort of manipulative. They're just like, that's great, Annie, I loved it, and they see things that they recognize and whatever. But my editor, first of all, she was in love with it, and that's what you want, in that relationship, is somebody who loves it as much as you do. And so the darkness is why I think we connected. I write horror a lot.
Yeah.
That's what I read when I was a kid. And I didn't really bring this into Storyteller's Death, but that's one of the things that kept me sane, is that I would read this horror and I'm thinking, all right, my life sucks, but at least there's not zombies, at the door. And so it sort of made me feel better. And so I like the darkness, but I didn't want it to be sort of overpowering in this. And I like that little, that little touch of magic that is in magical realism, which is very much about the colonized, and the thing about it is that in Puerto Rico, I still feel this to this day. It's like nobody, you say to people you believe in ghosts down there, nobody blinks an eye. Of course there are ghosts. But I say that in Morrisville, Vermont, and they're like, maybe you should up your medication. Oh. I mean, so there's like this the magic is a given. It's more accepted, and you feel like it's in the humid air down there, you know?
Well, you know, and also if you accept that there's a little magic, I mean, who knows what magic really is? And it's magic until it's science, and maybe it's true. What do we know? We don't know everything. And that's such a wonderful way of looking at the world. It's so peaceful and comforting. And it must have been so much fun to go into that world. But, you know, the thing about your book, such a theme of duality of the two different cultures and the two different ways of living and the reality and the storytelling and the difference in the story and the stories. I loved that theme in the book. Was that a conscious thing?
I don't think conscious. I think it sort of evolved organically. Again, it's like everything seems so in reality and stories and are so interwoven in the Caribbean for me. You know, the culture is so rich and it has all these histories, the African, the enslaved, and then there's the Taino, and everything is braided. It's a very braided culture. And I love that about it. And so I think braiding the kinds of stories I'm telling in this came naturally. And I think this is sort of, you know, this is the story of like the first half of my life. It's like braiding all those tales together and all those parts of myself. You said it so beautifully. It's like the different, I wanted to write as somebody who's on a border. I used to say that I feel most at home in a Pan Am 747 halfway between New Jersey and Puerto Rico, because I don't feel at home in either place, but they both feel like home. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense that it makes so much sense that you're about to make me cry. So as you have already in this gorgeous book, The Storyteller's Death, and you have done a gorgeous job of braiding these stories together. And here on Pub Day, we'll tie it up with a big red ribbon at the bottom of the braid saying congratulations to
Thank you.
on
And
this.
here's the blue cover. We ended up with the blue one.
Let's see. Hold them up together. Oh, yeah. I love I'm pointing to it as if you can see that I'm pointing to you. But still, look how luscious that fruit looks.
Anyway.
It's very, very
It's my
tempting.
baby. It's a baby I gestated for a very long time.
Which is, and well worth it, well worth it. Born
Thank
a
you.
teenager. Let's say, we have questions. I have been sort of neglecting the comments because I see so many people who have questions, and I really want you to answer some of them. I'm fascinated by the genre changes during the Q&A. Please ask Anne which is your favorite. Yes, so you had YA horror. Now you have the, meet the dates from hell. What are you? High school from hell.
Breakup from hell.
Yeah, breakup from hell. That's how many times have we all said that? And your short stories and your first novel co-written in 2006.
Yeah.
Where do you? I mean, has that been an evolution for you? Do you still have loves in every?
I love all of them. I mean, I am so, and this is why, Krista gets it. It's like, if somebody says, this isn't an Ann Cardinal book, well, you don't know Ann Cardinal, because I like all these different, I just wrote a middle grade. I've written picture books. There are things you'll see that are themes, like the house, growing up in an addictive household is something that resonates. It's molded me. Having a parent who dies, especially when I'm writing for kids, I want them to see themselves in a book, because I didn't see myself when I was a kid. But then, fear and trauma, all those things, but also humor. I write horror comedy, I want to talk about two genres you don't see as together. But magical realism is sort of like a lifelong love. And so the adult literary fiction is something I'm really enjoying. It is a different set of muscles.
It is.
That takes longer. It involves research. It involves going deeper, like I had to for those chapters. With the YA and with the middle grade, all those things come in, like I come through, but it's also telling a story, and kids aren't going to let you meander. You start pontificating and they're gone. So I have, it's a different set of muscles.
True. They do go away, but you draw us in with that. Who else has a question? Is that the original title? Asks
Diane, a good question. No. It started out, I think, The Gift of the Quintista. And I realized that though I wanted to have Spanish in there, I didn't want to have people not be able to identify it, right? And so I actually came up with The Storyteller's Death. And at first I'm like, Storyteller's Gift. And I'm like, no, it's darker than that. And so
it's not necessarily a gift, she thinks.
Yeah. Exactly. And so but I wanted it to be accessible. And so there's Spanish in there, but it's all sort of, you can sort of figure it out. I didn't want to italicize it. I mean, Puerto Rican Spanish is very much a mix, una mezcla. You do it Spanglish, and so I wanted that still in there, but I also didn't want to lose readers. If
you wouldn't lose a reader at all with it makes me as a reader feel smart, because I totally get it. And I think, oh, I kind of speak Spanish, when no, I can ask for towels and beer, but that's just about it. But it makes me feel smart. And I loved that you do that. It's very atmospheric and very evocative and very transporting, and honest. I mean, that makes it even more magically real. So I applaud that. Who else has a question? Did you get to choose the cover art, says Darlene?
You know what,
yours.
Darlene, is a good question. Also, they came up, Sourcebooks is really good at this stuff. And so they asked me if I had any ideas, and I sent out some things, but really I wanted them to sort of come up with it. And their artist and their designer came up with the canepas, and I immediately sort of gravitated toward that. And, I didn't want a beach. It's a landlocked story, so I didn't want it to be exotified, but I really like that these have an important aspect. And when we had the green, we got the feedback. It didn't seem like magical realism. And so I love what we ended up with. And so I really feel like it was all meant to be, but they did ask my feedback, but I really feel like they're the pros when it comes to this stuff, and they know what grabs people's eye. And so I'm very happy. I mean, clearly I had it tattooed on my arm.
Exactly. That's kind of a stamp, of approval. And it seems like the artist must have certainly read the book and
oh, yeah,
have been affected by it to pick that very pivotal and visual scene. So that's pretty cool. Sourcebooks is great. One more question. Let's see. Do you have, Vicki, very nice.
Vicki.
You have the next book. No pressure, not on your podcast.
Vicki. I have, okay, so the next book is about sort of who we are as women in particular, after society tells us that we're invisible, that we're not as useful. And it's about a woman who she retires from her academic job to be with her husband. Her kid's grown, and he dies 2 months later. And so she's sort of like, I'm not a wife, I'm not an academic, my kid's grown, who am I? And when she starts to sort of realize the freedom in that, she starts to levitate. The first line is, the first time I levitated, I was in the garden. And she goes to explore her roots, which is St. Teresa of Avila, which is actually my roots. I'm a descendant from a sibling of hers. And so she goes to Avila, Spain, and sort of digs into who she is after all these labels are gone. And it really is about that sort of stage of life that society sort of shoves you aside. And I leave to Avila on the 1st of November for 3 weeks to do research. So I'm very excited.
So that's Dávila. I see. I never
exactly. It's Avila.
Very cool. And
thank you, Darlene.
Yeah. We love I'm going to my mailbox right now, waiting for that. And Linda's saying you're all going to flip over the next book. Maybe we'll just levitate over the next book.
So excited.
I can't wait to read it. But we are all excited about The Storyteller's Death. This is a marvelous novel. You should, when we're finished, and go to the comments and look at them all, because there's just super applause and super acclaim and people saying, oh, that sounds good. I love the concept. This is wonderful. This next book sounds awesome. And that, it's completely great. So let's spin the wheel of fun and see. This is so much fun. We should have music. I always say this. I promise next time I'll come up with music. Let's do the wheel of fun and see who wins a copy of Storyteller's Death.
It'll probably be my agent.
Yeah. And thank you, Margaret, in the control room, for music. Very soothing music. Storytelling music.
Oh, it's my agent.
Nacho, you have the book, don't you, Linda? Does she have the book already? And she does.
Yeah, that's my agent.
Yeah.
She's read it many times.
Yeah, she has many, many incarnations of this book. Let's spin it one more time, Margaret. But she is a winner. Linda is a winner. We know that.
She absolutely is a winner.
Vicki Waters. That's fantastic. Yay. Good. You asked the question about what's next. Congratulations, Vicki. And there'll be some info in the chat about how to contact me about getting a copy of your book. Before I say goodbye to Ann and thank you, let me quickly tell you I was going to say, do not move from where you are, but this isn't until next Tuesday. So you can go ahead and move from where you are. But next Tuesday, be right back here at 3 o'clock, because we have a pretty amazing show at 3 o'clock. We're overbooked, double booked. And this is the only time in the universe when double booked is good. At 3 o'clock, look, Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. It is hilarious. It is, I mean, I keep saying hilarious. 4 60-something women who are ex-assassins who decide they will not be put out to pasture. Talk about people who were invisible.
Take
Right?
my money now.
It's so funny. And then at 4 o'clock, the #1 New York Times bestseller, Heat 2, by Michael Mann and Meg Gardner. This came out a couple weeks ago and went right to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. The rest of us are just like, yeah, well, that's great. So congratulations. We adore Meg Gardner. She is a rock star and has been a winner on Jeopardy, to actually won on Jeopardy maybe a couple times. And you all, if you don't know Meg Gardner, she's amazing. So next week, Deanna, I'm just speechless about how great these women are. Deanna and Meg, see you at 3. I have to learn about this. 3 and 4. Join us here for Crime Time. Today, we heard from the wonderful Ann Dávila Cardinal with her brilliant The Storyteller's Death. You have become the storyteller for us, and you know that, right?
Now I'm going to cry. Yeah.
And we are so grateful that
I'm honored.
Have been here today. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Anne, for coming. Thank you, Linda, for making this possible. Thank you all for coming here today. We'll see you next week. And remember, as I always say, it's always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.